Welcome back to the Entrepreneurs Forum. My name is Lenora Edwards, and I am accompanied today by the incredible Jeff Wagner, who is going to teach us all about things that I know nothing about. And it's completely unscripted. We have no pre questions, so we're just going to go on the fly on your area of expertise. How are you doing, Jeff? Welcome
I
to the
am
show.
great. I am. Thank you so much. I love being on the show. I love entrepreneurship. And I was so excited last night. I barely slept. I think I woke up at like 3:30 in the morning and then I slept till about 4. And, we're doing this one early on my end. It's just after 6 in the morning. I'm out on the West Coast. And, like any good entrepreneur at home, I'm definitely wearing sweats and I threw on a nice shirt. So shout out to
That's
all you Zoom entrepreneurs who throw on a shirt, and yes, it's good. So thanks again for having me on
awesome.
here. It's great.
Absolutely. I love that. That's awesome. And thank you for getting up oh so early. I know you are a morning person, but I know also some people aren't really into conversation that early in the morning. So thank you for being here with us. So, what
Yes.
are we talking about today?
Well, for starters, those wondering, that is a surfboard behind me. I won it the night I met my wife, so it always has a special meaning to me, and it's in my office, so I just set it behind me there. So yes, but so here's the thing. I threw out on my Facebook page that I was going to be was invited to be interviewed here, and I got all this feedback from other entrepreneurs, like you should talk about this, you should talk about that, and people were talking about, how do we keep employees? People were talking about money. They were, talking about how do I relax and just kind of chill and get away from the stress. And shout out to all of you entrepreneurs that are facing this. But Lenora, something occurred to me and it was a big part and I wanted to bring it up and it was that most small businesses fail within 5 years, right? You've heard that stat?
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is. But the more I started thinking about that, I'm like, what can I tell your audience? Like if I could give them just one thing and I could put something in their heart and their mind to think about, would they like that tip? Would they like a different viewpoint on a problem that most don't connect or even think about? Is that
I love that.
is
That
that something
sounds
we can
great.
is that okay? That's something we can talk
Yeah,
about? Do you think they'd
for
like it?
sure. Definitely, especially given the fact that it is all about entrepreneurship. And I think there are so many different areas. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people want to tell you their worst of it, which can really impact how you perceive your own experience. So I'm really excited for these incredible pearls of wisdom that you're going to share with us.
You are so good with words. I like shout out to you because I wish I could just grasp those words. Like you just put it together so nice. So there was a word that in grade 10, an exchange student from Mexico told me. And I apologize because I'm probably not saying it correctly, but he said it like this, mordida, which comes from the Spanish word, I think it's morder, and it
Okay.
means bite, okay? And Rodolfo, we became friends. I was pretty awkward in grade 10, and he was awkward because he couldn't speak English, and we became friends and hung out. And he told me about this word, mordida, and it was what the police would do if they pulled you over and they wanted to get a little money from you. They would just kind of go mordida, right? And it was like you kind of hands come out like this, and it's like, oh, you need a little bite, right? And so me and him would joke around a little bit with that word because like, if something's not happening at school, right, it was kind of our little code, right? Like someone's trying to take a little bite out of us and somebody is trying to grab that, right? And we've probably all experienced that, right? Like we've always, maybe it's not so unethical as a policeman asking for a bribe so that they don't have to, give you a ticket,
It
right?
happens.
Kind of thing. But right, it happens, especially in some countries. That's how they make their living, right? So I'm not slamming any country where this is happening, but I think it's really a great example for us to think about this mordida, this little bite, because this is exactly what inflation is. Okay,
Inflation.
it is a hidden tax. It's a theft and it reduces your purchasing power. And so most entrepreneurs, they don't think about how inflation affects their business. All right. But I want to, yeah, right. I mean, whatever business you're doing, have you taken the time to, draft out and go, oh, hey, Jeff, yeah, I can tell you exactly how inflation is going to affect my business.
Yeah.
Right. Like, Like, I
You
didn't.
don't think about it. Yeah.
No, I've had a couple of businesses. I took a company that was a $250,000 in the hole, and I managed to turn it around in 3 years, and I became a shareholder. I ended up with 33% of that company. I think, or maybe it was 30. I was in my early 30s, late 20s, something like that. And, I never really realized that that was one big part that I was missing. But here's the thing. Government policy in the United States and Canada, where I live, is set at about 2% a year. That's their target inflation, which, as all of us have seen recently, is very hard for them to control. Now, if you live through COVID and that, you've seen inflation happen, through supply constraints and that. So you think about the hurricanes that are happening right now. Okay, so the hurricanes hit the east coast of the United States, right? You would expect, because of natural disasters in this case, or like the pandemic in 2020, you can't ship things, people can't work, that inflation would make things like gas more expensive, right? If you only have so much gas, right? Let's say you have 10,000 gallons, but you have all these people wanting to buy gas. Well, then gas by nature will go up in price. So will toilet paper, right? So will construction material, things like that. That's what I would call like a natural act of inflation, like where inflation's hit, right? But that usually comes back under control pretty quick, right? Like we get gas to these people, we get more toilet paper, and that kind of brings prices down, and all of a sudden way more shows up and the prices adjust and they come back down, right? That's kind of most
Mhm.
people's mind of inflation. But
I would agree
the
with
re-
that very much so.
yeah, right? Yeah, you get
Yeah.
that, right? We really see it in food.
Mhm.
But
Gas, like you said.
what a lot of people don't know, and this is what I want entrepreneurs to really get, and then I'm going to share a solution with you, is that government policy is to be around 2%. 2 to 3% is kind of the band that they're comfortable with. They try to, be around 2% inflation. Now, that means that what they're doing is actually putting more money into the system to, keep that inflation going. Now, that works really well if you're a government and you can just print money. But I don't know about you. I don't get to just add zeros to my bank account balance. That would be, I
Mm.
mean, wouldn't that be nice?
That would be very interesting. But
I,
yes, I agree with you
I could be like,
completely.
hey,
We don't get to.
right, hey, we're at $35 trillion of debt, and I'd like to add another trillion in the next 100 days. Can we just add a few more zeros? Right?
Completely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get to do that, right? But this is what ends up happening. Now, many people way smarter than me. I'm just an entrepreneur, guys. So many people like the PhD finance types and that, they estimate the real inflation is actually quite a bit higher. Somewhere between 6 to 8% is kind of a good number. Um, Now that might, shock some of you listening. So for this example, let's just use, 2%. So now think about what 2% does over 5 years, right? If you just go 2 times 5 is,
Yes. 2 times 5. 10.
what is it? I'm putting you on the spot.
You are putting me on the spot. 10.
10, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I told you, none of this is scripted, right? We're just having a chat because I want to help you as an entrepreneur and I want to help everybody else listening, okay? Especially yesterday, I go to buy eggs, okay? And my farm, yeah, we live out in the country, and the farmer up the road, and I go, he sells eggs for $5, and I run into Jim, and we're having this conversation, and he's talking about how he's maybe not going to be selling many more eggs and maybe not sure he's going to get more chickens because a bag of chicken feed, which lasts him currently for 2 weeks, has gone from $10 to $22.
I believe it.
Right? Yeah. So right now everybody listening is like, well, yeah, of course I see this in the stores, I see this in the thing, right? But
Mhm.
coming back now to this 2 years, 2% per year over 5 years gives you 10, right?
Mhm.
Now, let's think about if the real smart people are saying we're 6 to 8% a year. Let's just go halfway and let's be conservative and say what does 4% of inflation do to you, right? If you're an
Mhm.
entrepreneur, well, 4 times 5 is 20, right? Now you're into 20%. Okay. Now the real stats, though, in the United States, and this is public information, you can look it up and see it, is that in the last 5 years, the money supply, in other words, money printing, the creation of new money entering the system. Can you make a good guess what it might be?
Oh, I'm sure it's been astronomically played with and distorted and heavily manipulated.
Well, you're right, all of the above. However, they actually have to publish something because it has to come out, right? So you can look
Yeah.
it up and see it, right? There's charts. But it's 28%. Yes, 28%. So now coming back to this idea of inflation and how it affects us as entrepreneurs and how it affects, Jim selling me eggs and how it affects you and your business and everybody else listening, you start to realize that, you know what, if I had $100,000, let's just use simple explanation for this. If I started my business, I have $100,000 and I need that to buy inventory and do things and, run my company and everything else.
Mhm.
5 years later, if the money supply is increasing 28%, I now need 128,000, right?
Yeah.
But most people aren't thinking that. Okay? Like you're in your head thinking, "Well, I'm still going to need 100 grand." Right? Like they're not
Mhm.
allowing for that in your small business. And remember, most small businesses fail in that first 3 to 5 years, right? So, does that make sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially so I'm looking at this from two perspectives. I work with people one on one, very specifically coaching, teaching, doing workshops, helping people from h- improve upon their relationship with food and their body. So that's one part of my brain. The other part of my brain is I used to own a bakery. I used to
Ah,
have my own baking business. And with the inflation of eggs and with butter and with sugar and the supply that I was going through, the numbers have jumped astronomically. And closed my bakery in 2019 because we were growing so quickly and my passion for it was not growing as quickly as my business. That being said, I remember butter being a very specific number. Eggs were, maybe they were 10 cents an egg at the time, and there's
right.
no possible way that you're doing that. So I'm looking at this from two totally different perspectives. And as the baker, as a solopreneur of my own business, and with the people that were supporting me through this, what came back to it is when I was charging, I think at the time I was charging $2 per cookie. When things were going up, my own money mentality, which then plays a role in entrepreneurship, I would feel bad charging people more because the ingredients were more. And so I was trying my best not to raise my prices, which is another thing that goes into how businesses fail when they don't take into consideration inflation, but also understanding it's not anybody's fault. This is business. This is how we keep the lights on. This is how we pay our
Right.
bills.
I love that example. So let's follow through with that a bit more because in the in every business really needs to understand the cost of the cookie, right? The cost for you to make your cookie, right? Like another tip for you, right? If you're not tracking your costs for you to make a cookie or your house or your business book or your widget, whatever that is, you really want to understand that real time, and that will help fight this inflation thing. But think about this, if you aren't sure what the price of milk's going to be or the price of eggs or the price of flour, right?
Mhm.
Like how do you order that stuff? Like how do you look ahead and say, okay, 2 years from now I can expand my business and do this because I know that, sugar will be this much and butter will be that much. Like how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were difficulties along the way because I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know the financial component of, okay, let's really look down and see what's coming in and what's going out and what the cost of everything is. I had a basic understanding, but certainly not the expert level that you provide or even have insights into.
Well, just so you know, the real experts can't do it either. Right? So don't they put out forecasts and they make good guesses, right?
Hmm.
But the problem is that it boils down to government policy making these decisions, okay?
Hmm.
So now, Jim the chicken farmer is not able to go back, like, he's like just a hobby farm guy and he wants to sell me eggs. I love that I can walk to his house and get eggs, right? But now he's sitting there saying, well, man, what happens if the price of feed went from $10 to $22 and now it's going to go to $32? All of a sudden I can't sell eggs for $5 and maybe I have to
Huge
charge 10,
problem.
right? Or maybe I don't even want to do it. It's not worth it anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Huge problem.
it's a huge problem. Now, here's where it gets really interesting with your cookie example. Most businesses operate on fairly, restrictive margins, right? Like, let's say,
Mhm.
for example, I don't know, can you share with me what your margin was on a cookie? Did you ever have the chance to figure it out?
Remember. I
Let's,
think let's say I was making 50%. So it costs $1 to make the cookie and to
yeah.
put the ribbon on it and the packaging, and then I was making $1. So we'll just make it
And,
easy math.
and then you factor in your lights, your
Yeah.
building, all that has to get factored in, right? So
Yeah.
let's take off another 25% for, let's cut
Sure.
that in half again. All right. So let's say
Yeah.
you're down to 50, you're down to, of your dollar, right?
Mhm.
Now 50%'s gone for actual production. And then you have your heat, your lights, your taxes, right? So now we take another 25%. So you're left with 25%, right?
Mhm.
And that would be a good, in most businesses, that'd be a nice, healthy profit. You'd be like, that's really great. However, come back to the inflation example. What's 2 times 5 is 10. So at
Mhm.
2%, which is public government policy printed out there, well, there goes 10% that's going to be mortita, the little
Mhm.
bite. It's going to be
Yeah.
theft. It's going to be taken away from you. So now you're 25, 10% goes down to, because you got to, it's on the full amount, right? Goes down to,
Mhm.
you can't buy as much anymore with it. You can't do as much. So maybe just, again, I'm just talking broad terms in math. I'm not trying to get too technical for the audience. So some of you can poke holes at this if you like, if we want to get really technical. But in general, we're just talking like this. So now you're down to 15%. But
Mhm.
if inflation is 4% a year on average over 5 years, right? Now you're down to 5%
Yeah.
because you're right, you're 20%. Now 25 goes down. But if you get your money supply increased and then you like 28%, and then we have supply constraints like what happened during COVID and what's happening now on the East Coast with the hurricanes, this is where suddenly the math doesn't work. And all your good planning and all your logic and everything you were trying to do just doesn't seem to come together and work,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And it can be so disheartening aside from the frustration of looking at it on paper and your logical brain going, "Okay, I can see where the issue is." The emotional part of you really takes a toll.
Right. Massively.
Yeah.
It's like I can remember that feeling. I am like, people say like I went to school and I went uphill both ways, right? Or, the wind's constantly blowing in my face. Like, you ever
Mhm.
been in a windstorm, right? And you're trying to walk and it's just this constant pressure
Yeah.
on you, right? That's like a lot of times business feels like that. And there's this little unknown thing, and I can't quite put my hand on it, but what's that constant pressure, right? That constant
Mhm.
thing that's coming at me. Well, the problem is that all entrepreneurs, right, are using the same measuring stick, but that measuring instrument called money in their business, it's constantly being diluted,
Very much so.
right? So the problem is this. Imagine if I was trying to build a house, all right? And or you're trying to build a house, or actually, you know what? Better yet, those people listening, you're trying to build a house. And every week, Lenora and I show up and we change your measuring tapes. And instead of a foot being 12 inches, we go to 13 inches, right? And you're like, well, a foot is a foot, right? I'm trying to do the math and I'm looking. And then the next week we show up and we change it to 14 inches,
Mhm.
right? And you're like, you're trying to get you're trying to make, and you're like, and you don't know when we're going to show up. We just show up and change the tapes,
Yeah.
right? So we're essentially messing with your measurement. It would be really hard because you're saying a foot and then you're getting too much here and that there, and you're like wondering why everything's costing you so much and why you're having all this waste, and you're literally going back and realizing something's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So if you're using a measuring system that's broken, right, it's going to be really hard to be accurate in your business of building a house. And
That
what
is a
most
beautiful analogy.
You get that? Yes. So what most entrepreneurs don't factor in is that, in my opinion, is this, that the money system is broken. When you can inflate money and print money at will, and it's not even something that's voted on, right? It's just
Mhm.
policy that bureaucrats are making decisions. Like, the central banks that make these decisions are not elected representatives. We're not
Mhm.
voting them in, right? So inflation just comes in as a tax. It's that mordida that's coming in and grabbing from you and taking from you, right? Does that make sense? Does that
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Wildly accurate sense too.
Good. I think, because I think we all feel that in our life, right? Like, we all look around and be like, why is coffee so expensive, right?
Yeah.
Why is I used to be able to go grab a lunch during work, and now I'm brown bagging it, right? Or,
Yeah.
I used to be able to hire people, and I can't find anybody, and those that are working, like, I can't pay them enough, right? I run into this with people who are like, I can't get good employees. And I'm like, well, just
Mhm.
pay them more, treat them better, be the best employer, pay them the best. And they're like, well, if I do that, I have to charge more money. If I charge more money, I'm going to lose customers, right? Like,
Yeah.
we used to live in an age back when my parents were alive, or they're still alive, that where you could live on one income, right? Now you need two incomes,
Much.
right?
Yeah. Very much so.
Or two and a half. A lot of people have a side hustle they're doing, right? Let alone
Mhm.
trying to be a single parent.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's so much that goes into it, and so many things have changed, and things have changed, but are we even literally able to keep up with those changes? What's the status quo? What does it look like? And I'm really glad that you actually mentioned early on that you have a solution for this. So I am really
Yes.
intrigued to hear this.
Okay. So imagine if I could show you a way to help encrypt your profit, and
Yeah.
literally able to protect against this, right? Protect against this theft. Well, at the same time, not requiring you go to school, get a PhD, right? You could just build your business, just keep doing what you do what you're good at. In your case, let's use the bakery example. Just keep the bakery. You don't have to go to finance school. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to, take a course for a year or anything like that. But you can change one thing and you get big results for the future. Is that something you'd want to do?
That sounds like an amazing solution.
Okay, so let's talk about Bitcoin.
Let's talk about
Okay,
Bitcoin.
if you put Bitcoin on your balance sheet as an entrepreneur, it automatically helps immensely with this problem we just talked about. Okay.
Okay.
Now,
How?
I'm right, exactly how, because I'm guessing that you know very little about Bitcoin, or maybe nothing about Bitcoin, and your audience is probably like, "Oh my gosh, here's a guy that's gonna talk. I just lost, like,
He
half of
said
the
the B
audience."
word.
Right, exactly, right? So the problem is that Bitcoin has gotten somewhat of a bad reputation from some very bad actors in this space, right? Bitcoin is just software, it's just technology. So people can use software however they want. Just like back in 98, 99, I remember when people were freaked out about emails, right? They're freaked out about using websites and putting my credit card, like, oh my gosh, people got scammed. I just saw somebody in AOL who lost everything and their bank account's been hacked, right? And there was all this drama and fear and doubt. And people even said, the internet is nobody's ever going to use it. They've got nothing to say to each other, right? Stuff like that, right?
I remember
Yeah.
Y2K is flashing before my eyes.
Yes, people were really scared, right? And
Oh,
and and,
yeah.
and freaked out. And there was also some bad actors, but that didn't change the fact that the internet remained and has become a very powerful tool for good, and of course for bad. People use it for bad too. It's not the knife's fault, right? The knife
Mhm.
can, cut your steak, right? It can murder somebody, but it can also cut a wedding cake, right? It's
Mhm.
completely up to that. So I want to make the
Beautifully
point
said,
about
yeah.
Bitcoin. Yeah, Bitcoin's a tool. Right now, it was invented out of the 2008 great financial crisis. So remember when Wall Street got bailed out by the government, right? They made all
Mhm.
these leverage bets against the housing market backing people that didn't have any
Huge
money,
issue.
and right, and then the government came in and socialized the rich and paid out all
Mhm.
these banks and companies, and the lucky banks that got backed by the government could go and, fire sale and buy up all the cheap stuff. Oh, right. And
Yeah.
everybody was like, wait, that's not fair. You can't do that. That's our money. Why did you give it to all these rich people? Right. And there was Occupy Wall Street and people were protesting and really angry. Right.
Huge issue. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge issue. So out of that, Bitcoin was invented and basically kicked off into the following year in 2009. Now,
Okay.
to understand how this helps solve this problem I explained earlier, you have to understand what Bitcoin is. So, computers solve very complex math puzzles, and whoever wins first is rewarded with a Bitcoin. Okay. And they have the right to inscribe data onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and they basically create the next block. So if you imagine a chain, right? Like a chain that
Mhm.
you're pulling, one chain, another chain, then you get to add another link, right? Block
Mhm.
chain. You in this case, you add a block to that, right? So that complex math puzzle is it's not just that anybody gets to solve it, everybody has to compete for it. So there's people with computers all around the world having to compete to solve this answer. And whoever gets there first wins and gets rewarded with a Bitcoin, and everybody else loses. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
Okay.
it's software that's programmed. The other beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's programmed that there'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoin.
Why
Okay.
only 21 million?
Because having a hard cap on something then creates scarcity, right?
Okay.
And by having a fixed amount, right, says, listen, you can only have so much of this. And then it gets harder and harder to create a Bitcoin. These math puzzles get harder, more complex. And the more computers around the world trying to solve this,
Mhm.
right, it just means that the puzzles get harder and harder and harder for them to solve. All right. So
Okay.
even if you came in with a bunch of money and say bought $1 billion worth of computers and all you wanted to do was try to find the answers, you'd get the Bitcoin. It still wouldn't help you much because the answers that or sorry, the math puzzles get more and more complex, right? As more people come on to solve it.
Okay.
So, okay, that makes sense kind of so far.
Yes.
I'm just trying to use really, yeah, again, not trying to get too complex. It's not a Bitcoin show. This is an entrepreneur show.
Uh-huh.
I'm just here to give the entrepreneurs a little tip and you'll understand why. So now imagine if you could have a bridge into the future, a bridge. Yeah. Like, like
I like a good bridge.
San Francisco bridge, right? And you could be like, well, that'd be cool. Like I could walk across that bridge and I could just go into the future and then I could come back to today, right? So you imagine you got that picture of a bridge now, and you're actually able to say, what if I could just walk across that bridge with 1 day worth of my work? So for everybody listening, this would be a really good exercise. Just quickly write down what the value of 1 day of your work is. Maybe that's $200, maybe $100, maybe $1,000, maybe 5,000, all depends, whatever 1 day of your value is. And
Mhm.
imagine you could walk across that bridge and you could leave that value in the future sitting there for when you arrived, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now for the
Very
purpose of,
interesting.
right, would be kind of cool, right? If
Mhm.
you could do that. So the interesting thing is with Bitcoin, because, and we'll talk about this in a second, why it's backed, but one Bitcoin now in the future will always still be one Bitcoin.
Okay.
All right, because we have a cap on the supply. There's only 21 million. So
Mhm.
remember, it gets harder and harder and harder to create one, right? Like you can only do so many of them. All right. So
Okay.
so with the bridge in mind, that you want to be able to take some of your energy, your hard work, whatever you did today, and you want to cross that
Mhm.
bridge and you want to put it in the future and you want to say, when I come to the future, I want to be able to still have that,
Yes.
right? Like we all want that, right? I want to be able to take, not just 1 day. I want to take 365 days if I can, right? I want to take as much of
Yeah.
my energy and my hard work as I can and bridge it into the future,
Mhm.
right? That's a lot of us. We want to retire. We want to sell our companies. We want to be able to do these type of things, okay? So the unique thing about Bitcoin is it allows us to do that.
Very interesting. Because the
Okay.
value of it doesn't change.
The supply doesn't change.
The supply.
the
The value
value the
increases.
value changes because more and more people want it or
Thank you for
less people
clarifying.
want it, right? Yeah, more
Mhm.
people buy it, it goes up in price. It's imagine like gold, right? As more people want gold, they buy more gold, gold becomes worth more money, right? And
Mhm.
Bitcoin, a lot of people say it's like digital gold, all right?
I have heard that.
Yeah. So gold, for example, if you want to take gold with you to the future,
Mhm.
there's a pretty serious cost with that, right? You got to get your gold today. You got to store it somewhere, right? You're going to put it in your safe, and then you're going to say, you know what, Jeff, I'm going to come see you in Canada and I'm going to bring my gold with me,
Yeah.
right? And I'm going to go like, probably not advised because if you go across the border here with gold in a backpack on the plane, they're probably going to stop you at customs and or at the plane and take your gold, right? And say, what are you doing with this, right? Or
Mhm.
you run the risk of somebody robbing you. You're like, you got this heavy backpack on, you want to come see
Mhm.
me, right?
Yeah.
So try, there's always a constant need to protect your gold and, be worried about somebody taking it from you, let alone trying to travel with your gold, right? So if you come to see me and you leave your gold at home, what good does your gold do for you? Can you get your gold when you're here in Canada?
Not so much.
Can't, right? Like you could ask somebody to go get it for you and maybe sell it if you needed it, right?
Mhm.
So Bitcoin's way different because we're going to talk about the bridge now because Bitcoin allows us to encrypt our energy and put it into the future for whenever we need it and access it from anywhere in the world.
Okay, so encrypt our energy. How is that different than, say, using a credit card right now, though? Because
Sure.
isn't that also encrypted?
Sure, it's encrypted, your credit card, okay? But now I travel quite a bit and I've often had my
Mhm.
credit cards not work when I'm traveling. And they want me to
Okay.
call in, they want me to check with that, right? The credit's based on, if I have first off, I have to qualify and have credit, right? To be able
Mhm.
to, get a credit card. The merchant has to be willing to accept the credit card, all those type of things, okay? So,
Yes.
all right, but think of the gold example, right? The gold is hard value, not credit,
Very much so.
right? And
Yes.
and when you encrypt your energy into Bitcoin, it's digital value. Now, I just want to bring you back to the bridge example because we're kind of bridging the future. We're kind of hitting a lot here right now. And for everybody listening, they're going to be like, I have to go back and listen to this one part because this is the key part to get right here. Okay, everybody, all you entrepreneurs, I've told you I'd help you with the problem. I identify the problem. Now I'm going to help you and give you a solution. So the unique thing about Bitcoin, coming back to those computers and those machines, which are 1,000 to 2,000 times more powerful than whatever computer you're using to do this interview with. Those machines now need energy. They work with electricity, right? They need to be stored, like you need to be in a warehouse or containers or that, right? A lot of them need to be cooled down because there's heat coming from them, right?
Mhm.
You also need people to maintain them, right? So there's human capital, just like your bakery example, right? Where you had people working and running the machines and whatever else, right? So there's people that's involved, right? So one side of this bridge is backed by actual physics. It's like anchored with physics, energy, capital, right? And human capital,
Mhm.
humans.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you come to the other side of the bridge and you're like, okay, so this bridge is over here with physics. Now we're coming across this bridge and it's over on this side. What's on this side? Well, this side, it's anchored by mathematics because the computers, remember, are competing to solve very complex math problems. Okay.
Okay.
Those complex math problems, people would say, well, what's math? I can't see it. I can't touch it. I can't feel it. Right. But we
Fair.
all we all believe in 1 plus 1,
That is
right?
true.
Right? I can't come to you and say, let me feel a 2, let me see
Mhm.
2, right? I might go like this, hey, it's 2, Lenora,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, yeah, but show me a 2. And I'm like, well, this is it. You're like, no, that's not a 2, that's your fingers. And
Fingers,
I'm
yeah.
like, well, no, but you get it up here, right? So
Mhm.
mathematics are laws and principles that it doesn't matter what universe you're in, 1 plus 1 will always equal
2.
2,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
now,
So physics and
Bitcoin,
mathematics.
exactly. So Bitcoin is this bridge that allows us to encrypt our energy. When we buy a Bitcoin or buy a partial amount of Bitcoin, right? One side of it is anchored here in physics. The other side of the bridge is anchored here in mathematics,
Nice.
right? Yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah.
So now here's the beautiful thing. That number that you wrote down and thought about, right? What's your
Mhm.
1 day of work?
Mhm.
When you go in to buy a Bitcoin or a portion of a Bitcoin, because you can buy down to 8 decimal points, but let's just use for the example, 1 Bitcoin, right?
Mhm.
Well, when you take your hard work and energy and you actually buy Bitcoin, you've now encrypted it on the system because all these computers are all working together to support the network and support the blockchain. It now sits in what we term the term wallets, and it
Okay.
waits for you for the future when you need it. And 1 Bitcoin in the future will always be worth 1 Bitcoin.
Mhm.
If you buy, you know, zero point 0.2 of a Bitcoin, in the future, it will always be worth
Point 2.
0.2 of a Bitcoin.
Okay.
So this is an amazing invention because this invention allows us today now to encrypt our energy and port it into the future on this bridge, backed by physics, backed by mathematics.
I love that you called it an invention.
It's the best way to look at it
Very, very interesting.
because there's
Now do
way,
you
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
no. The reason I frame it invention is because most people just think of it as digital gold, right? I can send it to somebody else and they'll take it as payment. I can convert it back into US dollars if I need US dollars. I can have it as a store of value to access in the future. The last 10 years, Bitcoin's averaged 63.8%, I think it is, or 63% a year, right? Per year, per decade. The last 5 years, it's been 76%, right? Because as the money printing happens, this is something that's fixed and constant. Remember,
Yeah.
there's only going to be 21 million, right? It takes hard work and energy and mathematics to create one, right? There's all these
Nice.
people competing. So this is why I made the statement, if you can put some Bitcoin on your balance sheet,
Mhm.
right? That's where it can make a huge difference in you as a business. And you don't have to do like massive amounts, right?
Yeah.
So I know you had a question for me, but let me just finish one thing because this think's a really good point. Let's say you and me are both in the bakery business, all right? Now we're competitors. 5 years ago, we both started at the same time. You're good, I'm good. All right. But I decide that I'm going to take 5% of our profit, right? Remember we said of when expenses are done, we have 25
Mhm.
left, right, for us. And of that 25, 5 will go. I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it into buying Bitcoin consistently. And there's businesses that do this. I do that, okay, 5 years ago, and you don't. All right. Now,
You
okay,
said
now
it better.
now fast forward 5 years later, when that value of Bitcoin has gone up over 1,500%, and I have been consistently buying throughout the process, right? By default, I have a lot more capital than you now,
Mhm.
encrypted in energy.
Yeah.
Now, depending where we are, you know, I might be in a position to say, you know what? I took debt on the bakery. I'm going to sell the Bitcoin now and pay off the debt.
Mhm.
Or, and now all of a sudden, I don't have the same pressure you have, right?
Yeah.
Or a pandemic can hit and I'm able to limp along because I have something that's increasing in value while the money printing's happening, and you're sitting here fighting, struggling, trying to make a go of it, right? You can see how
Yeah.
it can give you a competitive advantage without having to put out 20%. You can just put a small amount out there,
Mhm.
right?
Very much so.
Yeah, so there's two cases, and many businesses today are doing this. There's, MicroStrategy is one of the most famous, but there's lots of publicly traded companies out there now. There's a pizza place in Canada that's been doing this for quite a while. That's like totally people are following it, and they're expanding rapidly, right? Because as an entrepreneur, when you can save some of your energy this way and it doesn't get diluted by money printing, you don't have to use that fake measuring tape. Nobody's coming in switching out the tapes, right? When
Mhm.
inflation does happen, it follows with that and protects you, but it does even more. It actually makes you money over time because it's a scarce asset that more and more people are wanting. around the world. That's
Yeah.
why it's gone up so much in value.
Very true. Very true. I actually have 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
My first question is, how did you get into this? What inspired you to follow this early on, clearly?
Well, I remember I remember really busting my ass working so hard, right?
Yeah.
I had a wife at home with 3 kids, and I was just trying to make a go of it, right? And my business partner was like, we gotta buy land, we gotta do this, we were just constantly just going, trying to get ahead as entrepreneurs, right? But it seemed, Lenora, and I think a lot of people can resonate with this, it really didn't seem to matter how much money I made in business, it was just harder and harder to get ahead. Like,
Yeah.
it was like, I was taxed here in Canada like I was a single person, right? I could write off a little part of my wife, but it was like, it was just brutal, right? It was just so hard, right? And so that was one thing that I've just always faced, and I thought something was wrong with me, right?
Mm.
I didn't realize that I'm constantly being stolen from by my government,
Yeah.
because they inflate. So I would save money thinking, okay, we've got enough, and then I'd save the money to go buy a house, and then houses would go up,
Mhm.
right? And I'd make money, and then taxes would come and they'd take that from me, right? And it was just like,
Yeah.
it's just so hard, right? It was so when Bitcoin kind of came out a few years later, I was watching it, and the best man in I'm on my second marriage and happily married. And the best man of my wedding and I both said we would buy Bitcoin $1,000 worth when it was $5.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
yeah, it's 62,000 today. I really wish we had followed through, because the next day we got busy and we didn't do it. It just felt too complicated, right?
Mhm.
I didn't want to, now it's so much easier. Like, oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
teach a course and I just show people how easy it is to get into the system and
That was gonna be my next
take
question.
advantage. All right, we can talk about that. But I never did. But I've followed it since then. And at $25, I was like, oh, it's too expensive. We'll wait. And then at 200 bucks, I almost bought some, and then it came down to $100, and I had an acquaintance who said, "You'll never get Bitcoin again at this price. Like, you have to buy some Bitcoin." And again, I didn't do it. And it was like, at that point, some stuff going on in my life. I was suddenly, left as a divorced single parent with 2 boys to raise full time, and
Hard.
like, my life radically changed. But I
Yeah.
did finally buy some Bitcoin. I think it was 2015, 2014, something like that. I bought it and I just left it. And I actually, fortunately, bought it with a good broker. And then the broker said, well, because you're Canadian, we won't let you take it out. It was, all the laws were changing and stuff. And so that, you just sat there. But I really, really, so I was always paying attention. I was trying to buy more. And then I really started paying attention during COVID, when our Canadian government basically um, called the peaceful trucker protest, terrorists, labeled them terrorists, and declared a state of emergency, even though um, a federal court said what they did was illegal and followed that. They wrecked these people's lives, right?
Very
The
much so.
thing,
It's
the thing,
heartbreaking.
yeah, it really was. It was nuts. And I'm sitting here saying, I live in a country that I thought was free, and now they've done this to all these people. And I had a friend that was there, right?
Yeah.
And all of and on Facebook, I remember posting and saying, like, if I give these people food, like, am I aiding and abetting terrorism?
Mhm.
My country's just labeled it this way, like,
Mhm.
they were freezing people's bank accounts, the crowdfunding that went in to help them. They froze the crowdfunding,
Yeah.
all of this nuts. But what they couldn't stop was Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin was being sent to them as,
Mhm.
to help people. And Bitcoin, and the government tried, but they couldn't do it because Bitcoin's not controlled by any government. Right?
Mhm.
It's borderless. There is no CEO, there is no board of directors. It's decentralized, right?
Mhm.
So it's controlled by the people. So it's the
Yeah.
people's money. It's the people's energy, right? It's the people's
Mhm.
computers around the world, right, that are backing this invention, right? And now we have Wall Street and BlackRock, and we have in the United States, you guys are having an election this year, and one of
Mhm.
your candidates, actually, I know Kennedy was talking about it too, but I know Trump has been very vocal about having a
Mhm.
Bitcoin national reserve, just like you have oil reserves and gold reserves,
Mhm.
that you should have a Bitcoin national reserve, right?
Yeah.
And I get into why all this is important in the course I teach, but that that is a big idea, right?
Yeah.
About that. And so this is getting talked about now and it's accepted and people are starting to realize that you need a monetary system that doesn't rely on a government.
Yeah.
Because when the government can do more data,
Mhm.
right? That little take from you all the time at will and
Yeah.
just print more money. Like how do you protect yourself against
Yeah.
that, right? You don't, people get in all sorts of complicated trusts and offshore stuff and their investments and all of that. And as an entrepreneur, I'm just like, I don't want that. Just let me do my little business and I want my money to grow. Like, shouldn't my money be able
Yeah.
to still buy me the same amount of eggs 5 years from
Truly.
now, right? Can't it just
Truly.
buy me the flour I need 5 years from now? Like, I just want my money to work the way it's supposed
Yeah.
to work and the way it worked for decades and centuries until 1971 when the US went off the gold standard and other countries followed. Right
Yeah.
now, there's nothing
Absolutely.
backing it, just the goodwill and the reputation of the government.
Yeah. Wow.
A lot
Before
to
we wrap
unpack.
up, can
Sorry.
you tell us, I love it. Before we wrap up, can you tell us a little bit about your course and then the best way for people to reach you? Because you, Jeff, are a wealth of knowledge.
Okay, so thank you for that opportunity. I would say the easiest way to reach me is starbuildersconsulting@gmail.com.
Starbuildersconsulting@gmail.com.
Yeah, I've got. When maybe you can throw that in your show notes. We
It'll
do
be in
have
the show
another
notes for sure.
another more secure email that we use for some of our other projects that we do. We also mine Bitcoin, so we actually are some of those people with the computers.
Yeah.
So I'm involved with that. If anybody's interested in that, can always reach out. The course is unique. So the great thing about the course is that I basically took, 10 years, 9 years, I think it was at the time, of knowledge. And they say in the Bitcoin or the crypto world, the crypto space, that 1 year in crypto is like 10 years in real life because it just moves so fast, right? And I took what I had learned over that 9, 10 year period and I've condensed it down and compressed that time to help people go from basically knowing hardly anything and quickly get them up to an intermediate understanding. So then they can make a good decision. Okay, so there's a lot of fear out there. A lot of people are freaked out. They've heard FTX, they've heard that stuff, right? And so they get frozen, right? They don't do anything. And that's a bad spot to be in, right? It's kind of like there's a fire coming or a hurricane, but you don't do anything, right? And so they miss out on this, and they don't get to participate in this space because of that fear, right? So I'm the one that put together a course, and there's nobody else that does it the way I do it. It's live, it's unique. I take people from in 8 weeks, we do about 90 minutes a week and I take them and I just walk them through. Like I'm like, let's start with figuring out how to secure your wallet correctly to protect your assets, right? Let's understand blockchain. Let's get into how even to buy, like how do you buy crypto? How do you buy Bitcoin, right? I talk about smart contracts and NFTs, right? I get into scams, rugs, hacks. I get into like how to invest and make good decisions about that. I get into using it in business. Like again, we're talking to entrepreneurs, but imagine if I said to you, there's all these free tools you can use to make your business amazing, and it's going to cost you hardly anything. Would you want to accelerate your business 50%? Like most people would be like, that's a no-brainer, right? That's what's happening right now in the blockchain and crypto world. And then I wrap it up with discussing how we can use this technology as sovereign individuals. And yeah, so I do it over an 8 week period. If anybody's interested, they can email me. And I keep the classes small though, because I like the small kind of. I grew up in a small town. I like that kind of small, group of people, and
Yeah.
then we go that way. So yeah,
That sounds amazing. You are absolutely a wealth of knowledge and clearly an expert. And I love that you teach it now and how to help other people make sense of a very scary word that can sometimes feel very overwhelming. So that is phenomenal to hear. Thank
thanks.
you for your stories and your analogies and your metaphors. My goodness.
And I think it's important, right, that people, if nothing else, just start to learn about it because it gives you a really, really better understanding, right? And once you get the understanding, then you can make good decisions, right?
Yeah.
And then you can decide, like, yeah, maybe you're comfortable with inflation and mordida, right? Or hope I said
Mhm.
that right. Some Spanish person somewhere is like, I'm going to write that guy and tell him how to say this or spell it correctly. But or maybe you're like me and you're not, right? I believe it's theft, and I'm tired of my money being stolen from me this way,
Yeah.
right? So I use other sources to store my wealth and energy. I use that bridge, right? And I love
Yeah.
helping people find that bridge.
That is awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all that you did with everyone today. I truly, truly appreciate your time and all your insights.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Again, unscripted. She didn't know the questions or the thing. And Lenora, you have done a fabulous job. So shout out to you for hosting
Thank you.
this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Stay well, Jeff. And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening and stay tuned for the next one. We will see you soon.